Friday evening. A parking lot. An officer's hand around a black woman's throat. To the gathering crowd with their phones out, it looked like another case of police brutality that would end with the victim silenced and the officer protected. But when that woman reached in her jacket and flipped open a gold captain's badge, Officer Kyle Barnes realized his mistake too late. He hadn't just assaulted a random citizen. He'd just exposed a conspiracy that reached from the streets to City Hall. In grabbing Captain Naomi Carter by the throat, Barnes had grabbed hold of his own destruction, and everyone who'd protected him was about to fall. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The evening air hung thick with humidity as the sun dipped behind the sprawling suburban shopping center. The parking lot was alive with the usual Friday evening chaos. Shopping carts rattling across asphalt, car doors slamming, children calling out to distracted parents. Nobody noticed the two squad cars that had just pulled into the lot, their sirens silent, their presence unremarkable in this part of town where police patrols were as common as the evening news. Captain Naomi Carter pushed through the automatic doors of the grocery store, her arms wrapped around two brown paper bags filled with the week's groceries. At 43, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from 20 years on the force. Though tonight, she looked like any other tired professional finishing up errands after a long day. Her plain clothes, dark jeans, and a simple navy blazer gave no hint of the badge tucked safely in her inner pocket or the commendations that lined her office wall back at the precinct. She shifted the weight of the bags, feeling a can of tomato sauce threatening to tear through the bottom of one. Her car was parked in the middle section, maybe 50 yards away. She'd grabbed one of the better spots when she'd arrived 40 minutes earlier, back when the lot had been less crowded. Now, as she navigated between the maze of vehicles, she became aware of footsteps behind her. Officer Kyle Barnes had been on the force for 6 years, long enough to develop habits, but not long enough to develop wisdom. At 29, he still carried himself like he had something to prove, his hand habitually resting on his service weapon even during routine patrols. He'd spotted the black woman leaving the store, and something about her had caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she walked, too confident, too purposeful. Maybe it was the way she'd glanced at his squad car, without the usual mixture of fear and deference he'd grown accustomed to seeing. Or maybe it was just that he'd had a bad day and was looking for someone to take it on. "Hey," he called out, his voice sharp enough to cut through the parking lot noise. "You, hold up." Naomi's fingers tightened instinctively around the grocery bags. She'd heard that tone 1,000 times before, usually from the other side of the badge. She slowed her pace, but didn't stop, turning her head slightly to acknowledge she'd heard him. "I'm talking to you," Barnes said, closing the distance with quick, aggressive strides. His partner, Officer Tommy Garrett, remained by their squad car, leaning against the hood and watching with mild interest. Naomi stopped beside her silver Honda Accord, setting one bag carefully on the trunk. She turned to face Barnes, keeping her expression neutral, her voice calm. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Barnes was close now, too close for comfort, violating the personal space that most people instinctively respected. His eyes swept over her, taking in the designer handbag, the late model car, the groceries that included organic produce and expensive coffee. "I need to see some ID," he said, not bothering to explain why, not following any of the protocols that were supposedly drilled into every recruit at the academy. "May I ask what this is about?" Naomi kept her voice steady, professional. She knew better than to escalate, even as anger began to simmer beneath her calm exterior. "I've just finished shopping, and I'm heading home." "I didn't ask for your life story," Barnes snapped. "ID now." A small crowd was beginning to form. A young couple had stopped loading their groceries to watch. An elderly man with his grandson stood frozen by their car, keys in hand. Someone, a teenager with purple hair and multiple piercings, had pulled out their phone and was holding it up, recording. Naomi took a deep breath. She could end this right now by showing her badge, but something held her back. Maybe it was curiosity about how far this officer would go. Maybe it was the exhaustion of always having to prove she belonged. Or maybe it was the principle of the thing. She was a citizen first, and she had rights. "Officer," she said, maintaining her composure despite the heat rising in her chest. I need you to tell me what crime you suspect me of committing. You can't just demand identification without reasonable suspicion. Barnes's face reddened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like her in a parking lot where he felt like king. Are you refusing to comply with a lawful order? I'm exercising my constitutional rights, Naomi replied evenly. Unless you can articulate a specific reason for this stop, I'm under no obligation to. The movement was so sudden that several onlookers gasped. Barnes's hand shot out, grabbing Naomi by the throat and slamming her back against her car. The second grocery bag tumbled from her arms, oranges rolling across the asphalt, a jar of pasta sauce shattering in a splash of red. You think you're smart? Barnes hissed, his face inches from hers, his hand tightening around her throat. You think you could tell me how to do my job? Naomi's hands came up instinctively, not to fight, but to create space. She could feel the crowd growing, hear the murmur of voices, the electronic chirp of phones capturing every second. Her training kicked in. Stay calm, don't escalate, survive. Officer Barnes. Garrett had finally moved from the squad car, jogging over with concern etched on his face. Not concern for Naomi, but concern for what his partner was doing in full view of at least a dozen witnesses with cameras. Barnes either didn't hear him or didn't care. His grip remained firm, pressing Naomi against the metal of her car. You're resisting arrest. I'm not resisting anything, Naomi managed to say, her voice strained but controlled. She could feel her badge pressing against her ribs from inside her jacket. 20 years of service, countless commendations, and here she was with a hand around her throat in a parking lot like any other black woman who'd had the audacity to ask questions. Kyle, let her go, Garrett said more urgently, finally reaching them. He could see the phones, could already imagine the headlines, the internal investigation, the paperwork. It was then that Naomi made her decision. Her hand moved slowly, deliberately, reaching inside her jacket. Barnes tensed, his free hand moving toward his weapon, but Naomi had already pulled out the leather fold, flipping it open to reveal the gold shield that caught the parking lot lights. Officer Barnes, she said, her voice now carrying the authority of 2 decades of service and a rank that made her his superior several times over. You have just assaulted a captain of the Metropolitan Police Department. Take your hand off my throat. Now, the change in Barnes's face was instant and devastating. The red flush of anger drained away, replaced by a pallor that made him look suddenly ill. His hand released her throat as if it had been burned, and he stumbled backward, nearly tripping over an abandoned shopping cart. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Someone whistled low and long. The teenager with the purple hair said something that sounded like, "Oh snap," and zoomed in on Barnes' stricken face. The elderly man shook his head slowly, muttering something to his grandson about respecting people. Captain Carter, Barnes started, his voice cracking on her title. I had no idea. No, Naomi said, straightening her jacket and rubbing her throat where his fingers had left marks that would purple by morning. You had no idea. That's exactly the problem. Garrett stood frozen between them, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. He knew this was bad, career-ending bad, but his loyalty to his partner warred with his sense of self-preservation. Naomi bent down slowly, deliberately, and began picking up her scattered groceries. A woman rushed over to help, gathering the oranges that had rolled away. A man offered her a plastic bag from his own car for the items that had survived the fall. Thank you, Naomi said to the helpful strangers, her dignity intact despite what had just happened. Then she turned back to Barnes, who hadn't moved, who seemed incapable of movement. Officer Barnes, she said, pulling out her personal phone. I'm calling this in. I suggest you contact your union representative. You're going to need one. As she dialed, she could hear the whispers spreading through the crowd like wildfire. She could see the teen with purple hair posting the video in real time, adding captions that would make it go viral within hours. She could feel the weight of what had just happened settling on her shoulders. Not just an assault, but a revelation of something systemic, something that would demand more from her than just filing a report. Barnes finally found his voice again, though it was smaller, desperate. "Captain, please. Can we discuss this? It was a misunderstanding. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to assault a captain," Naomi finished for him. "But you meant to assault someone. That's what we're going to discuss, Officer Barnes. That's exactly what we're going to discuss." The Internal Affairs office smelled like burnt coffee and photocopier toner, a combination that Naomi had grown to associate with the worst parts of her job. She sat across from Lieutenant David Morrison, a man she'd known for 15 years, watching him fidget with his pen as he reviewed her report for the third time. "Naomi," he finally said, not quite meeting her eyes. "You sure you want to do this? I mean, officially? He assaulted me, David, in front of witnesses. It's on video." Morrison sighed, setting down the pen. I know. It's just, Barnes is tight with the union. This is going to get messy." "It already is messy," Naomi replied, her hand unconsciously moving to her throat where the bruises had darkened overnight into purple-black marks that no amount of concealer could hide. "The question is whether we're going to clean it up or sweep it under the rug." Her phone buzzed on the desk between them. Another text from Amara, her 17-year-old daughter, the fifth one this morning. The video had made its way through her high school like a wildfire, and Amara had watched her mother being assaulted over breakfast, surrounded by classmates who didn't know whether to offer comfort or stare in shock. Morrison stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the parking garage. "Look, I'll file it. Of course I'll file it. But Naomi, you know how these things go. Barnes is already spinning it." "Spinning what?" "There's video. He's saying you were acting suspicious, that you reached for something, that he felt threatened." Naomi laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I was holding groceries. I'm just telling you what I'm hearing. His lawyer, and yes, he's already got one, is going to paint you as someone who deliberately hid your identity to create a situation." "Create a situation?" Naomi stood up, her composure finally cracking. "David," he grabbed me by the throat. "If I hadn't been a captain, if I'd just been any other black woman in that parking lot, what then? Would we even be having this conversation?" Morrison turned from the window, and for the first time, she saw genuine conflict in his eyes. "That's exactly why you need to be careful. This isn't just about you and Barnes anymore. The media's already picked it up." He was right about that. Naomi's phone had been ringing nonstop since the video hit social media the night before. 3 news vans were parked outside her house this morning, and she'd had to sneak out the back door to avoid reporters. The headlines were already splitting along predictable lines. White officer assaults black police captain on one side. Captain provokes confrontation with street officer on the other. "Have you talked to Wallace?" Morrison asked, referring to retired Chief Henry Wallace, Naomi's mentor and one of the few people in the department whose opinion she truly valued. "He called me last night." Naomi sank back into her chair, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the past 24 hours. "He said Barnes is friends. People who won't let this go quietly." He's not wrong. The union's already mobilizing. They're calling it a rush to judgment and demanding a full investigation before any disciplinary action. "While I'm sure they'd be equally patient if a civilian had grabbed a cop by the throat," Naomi said dryly. Morrison returned to his desk, pulling out another form. "I needed to take some time off. Paid administrative leave, just until—" "Absolutely not. Naomi, I'm not hiding, David. I'm not going to slink away while Barnes spins this into something it's not. It's not hiding, it's protection. You've already had reporters at your house. What happens when Barnes' supporters show up?" As if on cue, Naomi's phone lit up with a call from her ex-husband, Marcus. She declined it, knowing exactly what he wanted. He'd been looking for ammunition in their custody arrangement regarding Amara, and this situation was like Christmas coming early for him. "I can handle it," she said firmly. Morrison looked like he wanted to argue more, but before he could, there was a knock on the door. Officer Luis Ortega stuck his head in, looking nervous. "Sorry to interrupt, Lieutenant. Captain Carter, could I speak with you privately?" Morrison nodded, and Ortega stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He was young, maybe 25, with earnest eyes and the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was about to say something he shouldn't. "Captain," he said, glancing at Morrison before focusing on Naomi, "I thought you should know. There's talk about the body cam footage from last night." "What about it?" Naomi asked, though she already suspected the answer. Barnes's camera, It supposedly malfunctioned. And Garrett's, the angle doesn't show much. Malfunctioned, Naomi repeated flatly. That's what they're saying. But Captain, Ortega lowered his voice, even though they were in a closed room. I saw Jenkins from tech support leaving Barnes's locker this morning. Early, before anyone else was in. Morrison's face darkened. Are you suggesting someone tampered with evidence? Ortega looked miserable but determined. I'm not suggesting anything, sir. I'm just saying what I saw. After Ortega left, Naomi sat in silence for a moment, processing this new information. Finally, Morrison spoke. You need to be very careful, Naomi. If they're willing to mess with evidence, then they're scared, Naomi finished. Good. They should be. She left internal affairs and headed to her office, needing a moment to think. But as she rounded the corner to her department, she saw Claire Dawson waiting by her door. The journalist was in her early 30s, sharp-featured and sharper-minded, with a reputation for exposing police corruption that made her persona non grata in most precincts. Captain Carter, Claire said, standing as Naomi approached. I was hoping we could talk. No comment, Naomi said automatically, reaching for her keys. I'm not looking for a comment. I'm offering help. Naomi paused, key in lock. What kind of help? The kind that comes from 5 years of investigating Officer Barnes and his friends. This isn't his first time, Captain. Just his first time getting caught. Against her better judgment, Naomi opened her door and gestured Claire inside. The journalist pulled out a tablet, swiping through documents as she talked. 3 excessive force complaints in the last 2 years, all dismissed internally. 2 civilians who mysteriously decided not to pursue charges after initial reports. And that's just what's on record. Why are you telling me this? Because the system protects guys like Barnes until they mess with someone the system can't ignore. You're that someone, Captain, but only if you're willing to push this all the way. Naomi's desk phone rang before she could respond. It was the front desk. Captain, your daughter's here. She says it's urgent. Moments later, Amara burst into the office, her eyes red from crying, still in her school uniform. She threw herself into her mother's arms, something she hadn't done in years. Mom, they're saying horrible things. They're sharing the video and adding these comments, and someone said you deserved it, that you were probably doing something illegal. Naomi held her daughter tight, feeling rage build in her chest. It was one thing for this to affect her, another entirely for it to touch Amara. Claire stood quietly by the window, giving them space, but not leaving. When Amara finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with her sleeve, the journalist spoke softly. Your mom's brave, Amara. Braver than most. But she's going to need people in her corner for what comes next. That evening, Naomi stood in her kitchen, making dinner while trying to ignore the news van still parked outside. Wallace had come over, his presence comforting in its familiarity. At 70, he moved slower than he used to, but his mind was as sharp as ever. They're going to come at you hard, he said, sipping the coffee she'd made him. Barnes has connections to the union president's son. They play poker together every Thursday. Let them come, Naomi said, chopping vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. I'm serious, Naomi. I've seen this before. They'll dig into everything. Your divorce, your record, hell, they'll probably go back to your academy days looking for dirt. There's no dirt to find. Doesn't matter. They'll make some up if they have to. As if to punctuate his point, Naomi's phone buzzed with a news alert. Someone had leaked selective portions of her divorce proceedings to a gossip blog, focusing on Marcus's allegations of her being controlling and aggressive, words that took on new meaning in the current context. Mom! Amara appeared in the doorway, her laptop in hand. You need to see this. She turned the screen toward them. Someone had created a social media page called Justice for Barnes, and it already had over 1,000 members. The posts were vile, racist memes, threats disguised as jokes, and Naomi's personal information, including their home address. Wallace was already on his phone. I'm calling a friend at the department. You're getting protection detail. I don't need. Yes, you do. His tone brooked no argument. This isn't just about Barnes anymore, Naomi. You've become a symbol, whether you wanted to or not. And symbols make good targets. Later that night, after Wallace had left and Amara had finally fallen asleep, Naomi sat alone in her living room. The house was quiet except for the occasional car passing outside. She was reading through the files Claire had left when she heard something at the front door. Moving carefully, she approached the window and peered through the curtain. There was no one there, but something white was visible under the door. Using a pen, she slid it inside, a folded piece of paper. The message was simple, printed in block letters. Drop it or regret it. Naomi stared at the note for a long moment, then walked to her desk and placed it carefully in an evidence bag. She took photos, documented the time, and added it to the growing file she was building. They wanted her to be afraid. They wanted her to back down, to accept the quiet settlement that would inevitably be offered, to let Barnes slip away with a slap on the wrist while she carried the weight of what could have happened in that parking lot. But as she looked at the evidence bag, at the threat meant to silence her, Naomi felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about one bad cop anymore. This was about a system that enabled him, protected him, and would continue to protect others like him unless someone stood up. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Claire Dawson's number. "It's Captain Carter," she said when the journalist answered. "Let's talk about those files you mentioned." All of them. The war was just beginning, but Naomi Carter had never been one to back down from a fight, especially not when the fight was this important. Barnes and his allies had no idea what they'd started in that parking lot, but they were about to find out. The threatening note from 2 nights ago still sat in the evidence bag on Naomi's desk as she sifted through the mountain of documents Claire Dawson had compiled. It was Sunday morning, and while most of the city was at church or sleeping in, Naomi was connecting dots that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. "Look at this pattern," Claire said, highlighting dates on her tablet. Every single complaint against Barnes was filed, investigated internally, and closed within 2 weeks. That's not normal procedure. Someone's been fast-tracking these dismissals. Naomi studied the timeline, her detective instincts firing. 20 years on the force had taught her to recognize when something was being orchestrated, and this had all the hallmarks of systematic protection. "Who handled the investigations?" she asked. "Different officers each time, but look here." Claire pulled up another document. Every dismissal was signed off by the same review board member, Captain James Rourke from Internal Affairs. Rourke, Naomi knew him, had worked with him years ago when they were both sergeants. He'd always been ambitious, the kind of cop who spent more time networking than working cases. A knock on her home office door interrupted her thoughts. Luis Ortega stood there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. She'd given him her address after his revelation about the body cam footage, sensing he might have more to share. "Captain, I'm sorry to come to your house, but I couldn't risk meeting at the station." "It's fine, Luis." "Cool. You know Claire Dawson?" Ortega nodded nervously at the journalist. "Actually, that's partly why I'm here. Ms. Dawson's articles about the Barnes unit. They're more accurate than anyone wants to admit." "The Barnes unit?" Naomi asked. "Since when does a 6-year officer have his own unit?" "It's not official," Ortega explained, sitting down heavily. "But there's a group of them. They call themselves the Cleaners. Barnes, Garrett, Jenkins from Tech, Sergeant Mike Patterson, and a few others. They work certain neighborhoods, handle certain situations." Claire leaned forward. "What kind of situations?" Ortega pulled out his phone, showing them a photo he'd taken of a duty roster. "See these highlighted sections? Those are special assignments. Always the same officers, always the same areas. And, Captain, those areas match up with something else." He produced a folded map from his jacket, spreading it on the desk. Red circles marked various locations across the city's east side. These are all buildings that were recently sold to Madsen Development Group. Every single one had police involvement in the months before the sale. Excessive patrol presence, multiple arrests of residents, code enforcement complaints that came out of nowhere. Naomi felt the pieces clicking together. They're using police pressure to drive people out. "It's worse than that," Claire added, pulling up property records on her laptop. "The buildings were all sold below market value. Someone's making a fortune off this, and I'm betting it's not just the developer." "I need proof," Naomi said. "Speculation won't hold up." "Then you need to talk to the victims," Ortega suggested. "The people who were pushed out. Some of them are still around. too scared to speak up before. But with you involved, maybe they'll feel safe enough. Naomi's phone rang. It was Wallace. "Turn on Channel 7, he said without preamble. The television showed Barnes at a podium, flanked by his lawyer and several union representatives. He looked polished, victimized, nothing like the aggressive cop who'd grabbed her throat 3 days ago. Rushed to judgment against a dedicated officer, his lawyer was saying. Officer Barnes was following standard procedure when confronted with a suspicious individual who refused to comply. The fact that this individual turned out to be a captain doesn't change the facts of the initial encounter. Barnes himself stepped up to the microphone. I've served this city faithfully for 6 years. I've never had a substantive complaint upheld against me. What happened Friday night was a misunderstanding that's being blown out of proportion for political purposes. Captain Carter has a history of aggressive behavior, as documented in her divorce proceedings, and I believe she deliberately created this situation to advance her own agenda." Naomi felt her jaw clench. Beside her, Ortega made a disgusted sound. "That's not even the worst part," Claire said, scrolling through her phone. "Look what his supporters are posting." The social media campaign had evolved from general support to targeted harassment. Photos of Naomi's house, her car, Amara's school, comments speculating about her personal life, her relationship with her daughter, veiled threats disguised as concerned citizenship. "Mom!" Amara appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas. "There's someone outside." Naomi moved quickly to the window. A van was parked across the street. Not a news vehicle, but a plain white cargo van with tinted windows. As she watched, the driver's side window rolled down just enough for someone to take photos of her house. "Call it in," she told Ortega, who was already reaching for his radio. But before he could, the van pulled away, unhurried, like they wanted her to know they'd been there. "This is escalating," Wallace said when Naomi called him back. "You need protection." "I need evidence," she countered. "Luis says there are victims who might talk. I'm going to find them." "Not alone, you're not." Which is how, 2 hours later, Naomi found herself walking through the Riverside Heights neighborhood with Wallace, Claire, and Ortega. The area had once been working class, but stable. Now half the buildings had for sale signs or were already boarded up. They knocked on the door of a small row house that had seen better days. An elderly black woman peered through the chain lock before recognizing Naomi from the news. "You're that captain," she said, then looked at the others suspiciously. "Yes, ma'am. I'm trying to understand what happened to this neighborhood. Officer Ortega says you might have some information." The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Dolores Washington, eventually let them in. Her living room was sparse, half-packed boxes stacked against one wall. "They came first about 8 months ago," she began, settling into an armchair that had probably been in the same spot for decades. "Said there were drug dealers in the building next door. Started stopping everyone who visited, searching cars, making arrests. My grandson got picked up 3 times just for coming to help me with groceries." "Was there drug activity?" Naomi asked gently. Mrs. Washington shook her head. "That family had been there longer than me. Good people, but after enough harassment, they moved. Then the police attention shifted to our building. Noise complaints when there was no noise. Code violations that didn't exist until an inspector showed up with cops. Do you remember which officers? That young one on TV, Barnes. He was always here. Him and others. They'd stand on the corner, watching, making everyone nervous. People started moving out just to get away from it. Claire was recording everything with Mrs. Washington's permission. Did anyone ever mention Madsen Development? Not directly. But after enough people left, a nice young man in a suit showed up offering to buy my place. Said the neighborhood was going downhill, that I should get out while I could still get something for it. Do you still have his car?" Naomi asked. Mrs. Washington shuffled to an old secretary desk, pulling out a business card. "Gregory Madsen, President, Madsen Development Group." As they left Mrs. Washington's house, Ortega's radio crackled. He listened, his face going pale. "Captain, there's been an incident at your house." They raced back to find 2 police cruisers in Naomi's driveway. Her front window was shattered, a brick lying among the glass shards on her living room floor. But it was what was spray-painted on her garage door that made her blood run cold. captains can drown too. The same phrase from the note, now public, bold, impossible to ignore. Where's Amara? Naomi asked, panic rising. She's safe, one of the responding officers said. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, has her. She called it in when she heard the glass break. Naomi walked through her violated home, taking in the damage. This wasn't random vandalism. This was a message, an escalation, a declaration that they knew where she lived and weren't afraid to act. I've got something, Claire said, looking at her phone. One of my sources just sent this. It was a screenshot from a private police forum, the kind that required verified law enforcement credentials to access. The thread was about Naomi, and the comments were vicious. But one stood out, posted by a username CleanerCrew6. Someone needs to remind the captain that accidents happen, especially to people who don't know when to back off. CleanerCrew6, Ortega said. That's got to be one of them. Barnes's badge 642. It's not enough for court, Wallace said, but it's enough to establish a pattern of intimidation. The press conference was Naomi's idea, against the advice of almost everyone. Monday morning, 4 days after the parking lot incident, she stood at a podium outside City Hall. The bruises on her throat now a sickly yellow-green that no amount of makeup could completely hide. Good morning, she began, her voice carrying across the crowd of reporters, supporters, and detractors. I stand here not just as a police captain, but as a citizen who was assaulted by someone sworn to protect and serve. The badge I carry doesn't make me more deserving of justice, but it shouldn't make me less deserving either. She paused, meeting the eyes of the cameras. No one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it. From the back of the crowd, the heckling started. Liar, someone shouted. Badge Bunny trying to get famous. Security moved toward the disruption, but more voices joined in. Signs appeared. Barnes did nothing wrong, and Carter set him up. Naomi continued, steady and controlled. What happened to me happens every day to citizens who don't have a badge to flash, who don't have a platform to speak from. Officer Barnes has a pattern of behavior that's defamation. A man in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd. Richard Stockton, Barnes's lawyer. My client will be filing charges against Captain Carter for these baseless accusations. Then I look forward to presenting evidence in court, Naomi replied coolly. The press conference devolved into chaos after that, but Naomi had made her point. She was not backing down. That afternoon, the retaliation intensified. Someone leaked her personal cell phone number and home address to a Cop Watch website, but twisted to make her look like the corrupt officer. Within hours, her phone was unusable from the flood of calls and texts. Worse, Amara's school called. There had been an incident. Naomi found her daughter in the principal's office, her face streaked with tears. Someone had posted flyers around the school with Naomi's picture and the words, "Dirty cop's daughter goes here," with an arrow pointing to Amara's class schedule. I can't go back there, Amara sobbed in the car. Everyone's either looking at me with pity or like I'm some kind of freak. Someone said you probably planted evidence on innocent people, and that's why you're going after Barnes. Baby, you know that's not true. I know, but they don't care about the truth, Mom. They just care about picking sides. That evening, while Amara stayed with Wallace and his wife for safety, Naomi met with Claire at a small cafe downtown. The journalist had been digging deeper into the financial connections. I've got it, Claire said, sliding a folder across the table. Bank records. Don't ask how I got them. Naomi studied the documents. Regular deposits into an account under Barnes's name, always just under the $10,000 reporting requirement. The deposits coincided with the dates buildings in Riverside Heights were sold to Madsen Development. This is it, Naomi breathed. This is the connection. There's more. I tracked down one of Barnes's former partners, retired now and willing to talk off the record. He says Barnes has been dirty for years, but he's protected because he does favors for people in power. What kind of favors? The kind that keeps certain neighborhoods clean for development. The kind that make problems disappear for the right price. Naomi's phone buzzed with a text from Ortega. Emergency. Meet me at the old warehouse on Pier 47. Come alone. Trust me. It felt like a trap, but Ortega had risked everything to help her. She told Claire to wait, that she'd be back in an hour. The warehouse was dark, abandoned, the kind of place where bad things happened in police procedurals. Naomi kept her hand near her service weapon as she entered. "Luis," she called out. Ortega emerged from the shadows, but he wasn't alone. Barnes was with him, along with Garrett and two other officers she recognized as part of the cleaners. "I'm sorry, Captain," Ortega said, and he actually looked it. "They have my family. So they plant drugs in my wife's car, arrest her in front of our kids." Barnes stepped forward, cocky again now that he had the advantage. "You should have taken the hint, Captain. Dropped it when you had the chance. Is this where you threaten me? Maybe rough me up a little?" Naomi kept her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "Threaten? No, no. This is where we make a deal. You drop everything. The complaint, the investigation, the media circus. In return, your daughter stays safe at school. Your house doesn't have any more accidents, and Officer Ortega's family remains drug-free." "You're really this stupid?" Naomi asked. "You think I came here alone?" Barnes laughed. "We've been watching you, Captain. You told the reporter to wait. You came alone because you still think like a cop, still believe in protecting your sources." He was right about her coming alone, but wrong about something else. Naomi pulled out her phone, showing the recording app that had been running since she got Ortega's text. "Everything you just said is being uploaded to the cloud. Threatening a fellow officer, admitting to planning to plant evidence, conspiracy to intimidate a witness." Barnes lunged for the phone, but Naomi was ready. She sidestepped, using his momentum against him, sending him stumbling into Garrett. "You think you're untouchable because you've gotten away with it before," she said, backing toward the door. "But you just gave me everything I need." "That recording won't hold up in court," Garrett said. "No warrant, no admissibility." "Maybe not in criminal court," Naomi agreed. "But the court of public opinion? The FBI's public corruption unit? They'll be very interested." She made it to her car, hands shaking as she started the engine. In her rearview mirror, she could see them arguing, Barnes gesticulating wildly. Back at the cafe, Claire was pacing anxiously. "I was about to call for backup." "I've got it," Naomi said, playing the recording for her. "They just confessed to everything. This is huge. I can have this online within the hour." "Wait," Naomi said. "First, we need to protect Ortega's family. He's a victim here, too." They spent the next 2 hours coordinating. Wallace arranged for state police protection for Ortega's family. Claire prepared her story with the new audio evidence. Naomi filed a report with the FBI, bypassing local law enforcement entirely. By midnight, the story was live. Police corruption exposed. Officers caught on tape threatening Captain, planning to plant evidence. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The FBI announced they were opening an investigation. The state attorney general's office issued a statement. The police union, sensing which way the wind was blowing, released a carefully worded statement about taking all allegations seriously. But the victory fell hollow when Naomi returned to Wallace's house to find Amara still awake, staring at her laptop. "They're saying you set Dad up," she said quietly. "That you're some kind of monster who ruins everyone around you." Marcus had given an interview to a tabloid blog, painting Naomi as vindictive and unstable, someone who created drama wherever she went. He hinted that he was considering seeking full custody for Amara's safety. "Do you believe that?" Naomi asked her daughter. Amara closed the laptop and looked at her mother, seeing the exhaustion, the bruises that still hadn't fully healed, the weight of fighting not just for herself, but for something bigger. "No," Amara said finally. "I see someone who refuses to let bad people win, even when it costs everything." The next morning brought new challenges. Barnes's lawyer had filed a defamation suit, seeking damages and an injunction against further public statements. The police union announced they were providing full legal support to Barnes and calling for Naomi's suspension pending a full investigation of her actions. But something had shifted. Other victims were coming forward. Mrs. Washington had connected Naomi with 6 other families who'd been pushed out of their homes. 2 former officers reached out to Claire, willing to testify about the corruption they'd witnessed. Naomi stood in her damaged home, looking at the boarded-up window, the painted thread on her garage that crime scene techs were photographing. This was far from over. Barnes and his crew wouldn't go down without a fight, and they'd shown they were willing to do anything to protect themselves. Her phone rang. It was the Attorney General himself. "Captain Carter, I've reviewed your case. We're convening a grand jury. I'll need you to testify. I'll be there. Captain, I need you to understand something. These people, they have resources and connections. This is going to get worse before it gets better." Naomi thought about Amara, about Mrs. Washington, about all the victims who'd been too afraid to speak up before. "Let them come," she said. "I'm not backing down." As she hung up, she saw another van parked across the street. But this time, it was the FBI surveillance team Wallace had arranged. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through her boarded window, and Naomi allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. Barnes had made a crucial mistake at the warehouse. He'd shown his true face, and now there was no taking it back. The war was escalating, but for the first time since that night in the parking lot, Naomi felt like she had a real chance of winning. Not just for herself, but for everyone who'd been crushed under the boot of corruption. Tomorrow, she would walk into that courtroom for the preliminary hearing. She would face Barnes across a legal battlefield instead of a dark warehouse. And she would begin the process of tearing down the system that had protected him for so long. The fight was far from over, but Captain Naomi Carter had never been one to surrender. And with each passing day, more people were standing with her, ready to demand justice. Tuesday morning arrived with a determination that Naomi hadn't felt since her early days on the force. The warehouse recording had changed everything, shifting her from defense to offense. She sat in her makeshift command center, Wallace's dining room, surrounded by boxes of evidence, laptops, and a growing team of people willing to stand against corruption. "We stop reacting and start attacking," she announced to the group gathered around the table. Luis Ortega sat nervously at one end, his family now under state protection, but his conscience still heavy. Claire Dawson typed furiously on her laptop, preparing another exposé. Wallace poured coffee with steady hands, his years of experience invaluable in navigating the political minefield. "What's our next move?" Claire asked. "We follow the money," Naomi said, spreading out the financial documents she'd been studying all night. "Barnes is just a soldier. Someone's paying him, and I want to know who's at the top." Amara walked in, dressed for school but hesitant. "Mom, I want to help." "Absolutely not. This is too dangerous. I'm 17, not 7, and they already made me a target." Amara pulled out her phone, showing an Instagram account she'd created. "I've been documenting everything. Every threat, every harassment, every lie they post about you. It's all time-stamped and archived." Naomi started to protest, but Wallace interrupted. "The girl's got your spine, Naomi. And she's right. She's already in this whether you like it or not." "Fine," Naomi conceded. "But you work from here, with protection. No solo missions. Understood." Amara nodded, settling at the table with her laptop. Ortega cleared his throat. "Captain, there's something else. Barnes keeps records. Not official ones, personal ones. He's paranoid about his partners turning on him, so he documents everything as insurance." "Where?" "Storage unit off Highway 12. He mentioned it once when he was drunk, said it was his insurance policy." Claire looked up from her computer. "That's not enough for a warrant." "No," Naomi agreed, "but it's enough to start surveillance." "Luis, do you know the unit number?" "B47. He kept the key on his personal keychain, separate from his duty keys." While Wallace made calls to friends in the state police about watching the storage facility, Naomi turned her attention to Barnes's financial records. The deposits were regular, but the amounts varied. She started cross-referencing them with city records, looking for patterns. "Got it," she said after an hour of searching. "Every deposit corresponds with a property sale in Riverside Heights or the East District. But look at this. The amounts are exactly 10% of the difference between the assessed value and the sale price." "He's getting kickback for driving down property values," Claire said. "That's RICO territory." "It gets better," Amara chimed in from her laptop. "I've been tracking the developer, Gregory Madsen. He's connected to 3 city council members through campaign donations. And guess who attended the same country club as the police union president. "Madsen," Wallace said, not even needing to look. "I've been around long enough to know how these networks operate." Naomi's phone rang. It was the state attorney general's office. "Captain Carter, we need you to come in immediately. There's been a development." An hour later, Naomi sat across from Attorney General Patricia Thornton, a woman known for her tenacity in pursuing corruption cases. "Barnes's lawyer filed an emergency injunction," Thornton explained. "He's trying to block the warehouse recording from being used, claiming it was illegally obtained. He threatened my daughter. He admitted to planning to plant evidence." "I know, and we're fighting it. But I need more. The recording alone might not be enough if a judge rules it inadmissible." "Then let's give you more," Naomi said. She laid out everything they discovered: the financial records, the property scheme, the connection to Madsen and potentially to city officials. Thornton studied the documents, her expression sharpening. "This is extensive, but we need someone on the inside to confirm it. Ortega will testify, and I think I can get Officer Jenna Pike to flip." "Pike? She's been Barnes's partner for 2 years." "Exactly. She knows where the bodies are buried, and she's young enough to maybe have a conscience left." That afternoon, Naomi arranged to meet Pike at a coffee shop in a neighborhood far from any precinct. The younger officer arrived looking haggard, constantly checking over her shoulder. "I can't be seen with you," Pike said immediately. "Yet you came," Naomi observed. "That tells me something." Pike stared into her coffee. "I became a cop to help people. But Barnes, the things he makes us do, you can stop it, Jenna. Testify. Tell the truth about what's been happening. They'll destroy me. My career, my life. They're destroying you anyway," Naomi said gently. "Every time you follow an illegal order, every time you stay silent, a piece of you dies. I know because I've seen it happen to too many good cops." Pike was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached in her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "Body cam footage," she said quietly. "Barnes doesn't know I copied it before it was deleted. It shows him coaching me on how to escalate a traffic stop to justify an arrest." The driver was a tenant in one of Madsen's target buildings. Naomi pocketed the drive carefully. "Will you testify? If you can guarantee protection. Real protection, not just empty promises." "Done." That evening, back at Wallace's house, they reviewed Pike's footage. It was damning. Barnes explicitly instructing her to find any reason to arrest a man whose only crime was living in a building Madsen wanted. "This is it," Claire said. "This breaks everything open." But their victory was short-lived. Naomi's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of Amara at school that day, taken from a distance. The message read, "Still think you're winning?" "That's it," Naomi said, her protective instincts overriding everything else. "Amara's not going back to that school." "Mom, I have finals." "You'll take them online. This isn't negotiable." Wallace's phone rang. He listened, his face darkening. The storage unit. Someone's there now. They pulled up the live feed from the state police surveillance. Barnes was at a storage unit, loading boxes into a van. "He's destroying evidence," Ortega said. "Not if we stop him," Naomi replied. "Call in. State police need to move now." 20 minutes later, they watched on Claire's phone as state troopers surrounded Barnes at the storage facility. He tried to run, but was quickly apprehended. The boxes he'd been loading contained exactly what they'd hoped: meticulous records of every bribe, every forced eviction, every illegal order. But Barnes wasn't going quietly. As they led him away in handcuffs, he shouted at the cameras that had appeared. "Captain Carter planted this. She's setting me up. I'm being railroaded by a corrupt cop with a vendetta." Wednesday morning's preliminary hearing drew the packed courthouse. Media vans lined the street. Protesters held signs both supporting and condemning Naomi, and security was heightened after several threat assessments. Naomi sat beside the state prosecutor, Assistant Attorney General Michael Brennan, trying to project calm despite the chaos around her. Barnes entered with his high-priced defense team, led by Richard Stockton, looking confident despite his arrest at the storage unit. He'd made bail within hours, the union putting up the money without hesitation. His supporters filled one side of the gallery, while Naomi's filled the other. Claire and Amara sat directly behind Naomi, providing silent support. Judge Catherine Morrison, known for her no-nonsense approach, called the court to order. We're here for preliminary hearings on multiple charges against Officer Kyle Barnes, including assault, civil rights violations, and conspiracy. Mr. Stockton, I understand you have a motion. Stockton stood, his voice carrying the confidence of someone used to winning. Your Honor, we move to dismiss all charges. The alleged victim, Captain Carter, manufactured this conflict by deliberately concealing her identity. Furthermore, the primary evidence, an illegally obtained recording, should be suppressed, along with any evidence derived from it. Your Honor, Brennan countered, the recording was made by Captain Carter in self-defense while being threatened. Officer Barnes explicitly admitted to planning to plant evidence and threatening witness families. The chain of custody issues he raises are fabricated. Let's address this recording, Judge Morrison said. I'll hear it in chambers first. 30 minutes later, they returned. The judge's expression was grim. The recording will be admitted, she announced. The court finds that Captain Carter was acting to protect herself and others from immediate threat of criminal conduct. Stockton wasn't finished. Your Honor, we also challenge the admissibility of the body cam footage provided by Officer Pike. She violated department policy by copying it. Policy violations don't make evidence inadmissible if it shows criminal conduct, the judge replied sharply. Claire leaned forward, whispering to Naomi. Barnes looks nervous now. She was right. Barnes was conferring frantically with his lawyers as Brennan introduced exhibit after exhibit. The timeline Naomi had constructed was devastating. 911 logs, store surveillance, and traffic cameras all contradicted Barnes's version of events by crucial minutes. Your Honor, Brennan said, we'd like to play the audio captured by journalist Claire Dawson. The courtroom fell silent as Barnes's voice filled the room. The captain should have just stayed in her place. Several jurors shifted uncomfortably. The phrase was damning not just for its admission, but for its tone, dismissive, superior, threatening. Stockton tried to object, but Judge Morrison overruled him. The defendant's own words are certainly admissible, Counselor. The union representative who'd been glaring at Ortega from the gallery stood up and left, pulling out his phone as he walked. Within minutes, Ortega's phone buzzed with a text. Your protection won't last forever. Naomi showed the message to Brennan, who immediately asked for a sidebar. Your Honor, we have evidence of ongoing witness intimidation, he said, showing her the text. Judge Morrison's face darkened. Any attempts to intimidate witnesses will result in immediate revocation of bail. Make sure your client and his associates understand that, Mr. Stockton. When they returned to open court, Brennan introduced the financial evidence. Your Honor, we have bank records showing Officer Barnes received regular payments coinciding with property sales in areas he patrolled. Objection, Stockton said. Relevance. It goes to motive and pattern of conduct, Brennan replied. These payments are directly linked to the developer Gregory Madsen, whose properties Officer Barnes was protecting through systematic harassment of residents. I'll allow it. The bank records were displayed on a screen, showing the deposits Naomi had traced. The gallery murmured as the amounts became clear. Nearly $200,000 over 2 years. Where did a patrol officer get that kind of money? Someone whispered. Barnes suddenly stood up, ignoring his lawyer's attempts to stop him. This is a witch hunt. Captain Carter is trying to destroy me because I didn't bow down to her. Mr. Barnes, sit down, Judge Morrison commanded. One more outburst, and you'll be held in contempt. But the damage was done. Barnes had shown the courtroom his true face. Angry, entitled, uncontrolled. Several reporters typed furiously on their phones, live tweeting his explosion. Brennan continued methodically. Your Honor, we call Officer Luis Ortega to testify. Ortega took the stand, visibly nervous but determined. He detailed the cleaners' unit, the pressure to follow illegal orders, the threats against his family when he tried to help Captain Carter. Officer Barnes specifically told me that if I testified, he'd make sure drugs were planted in my wife's vehicle, Ortega said clearly. That's a lie, Barnes shouted, on his feet again. This time, Judge Morrison had enough. Mr. Barnes, you're in contempt. Bailiff, take him into custody. As Barnes was handcuffed, again, his lawyers scrambled to maintain composure. Stockton requested a recess, which the judge granted. During the break, Naomi received a call from Wallace. State police just raided Madsen's office, he said. They found a ledger with code names. Barnes is listed as cleaner one. There are 6 others. When court resumed, Barnes was back, but subdued, the contempt charge adding to his mounting problems. Brennan introduced the evidence from Madsen's office, showing the clear connection between the developer and the corrupt officers. Your Honor, Brennan said, we also have this. He played Pike's body cam footage, showing Barnes instructing her on how to escalate a routine stop. The courtroom watched as Barnes demonstrated how to provoke someone into a reaction that would justify arrest. Get in their space, Barnes's voice instructed on the video. Make them uncomfortable. If they step back, say they're acting suspicious. If they stand their ground, say they're being aggressive. Either way, you've got cause. The judge looked disgusted. Several people in the gallery shook their heads. Stockton made one last attempt. Your Honor, Officer Barnes has served this city for 6 years. One mistake shouldn't. One mistake. Judge Morrison interrupted. Counselor, we've seen evidence of systematic corruption, witness intimidation, and civil rights violations. This isn't one mistake. It's a pattern of criminal behavior. She turned to address the court. Based on the evidence presented, this case will proceed to trial on all charges. Furthermore, given the evidence of witness intimidation and the defendant's behavior in this courtroom, bail is revoked. Mr. Barnes will remain in custody. The courthouse erupted. Barnes's supporters shouted about injustice, while Naomi's supporters applauded. Barnes himself looked stunned as the bailiffs approached with handcuffs for the 3rd time in 2 days. This isn't over, he shouted at Naomi as they led him away. You have no idea who you're messing with. Outside the courthouse, Naomi faced a sea of reporters. She stood at the microphones, Amara and Wallace flanking her, and spoke clearly. Today, the system worked as it should. No one, not Officer Barnes, not his enablers, not those who profit from corruption, is above the law. This is just the beginning. We will root out every bit of corruption, prosecute every crime, and restore faith in our police department. But even as she spoke, she noticed something troubling. Several known corrupt officers stood at the edge of the crowd, watching her with undisguised hostility. One drew his finger across his throat in a slashing motion. That evening, back at Wallace's house, they celebrated cautiously. The preliminary hearing was a victory, but everyone knew the real battle was just beginning. The unions called an emergency meeting, Ortega reported, checking his phone. My sources say they're planning something big. Let them plan, Naomi said. We have the evidence, we have the truth, and now we have momentum. Claire was already working on her next article, one that would expose the connections between Madsen, the city council members, and potentially the police union leadership. This goes all the way to the top, doesn't it? Yes, Wallace said quietly. And that's what makes it dangerous. Barnes was protected because he was useful to powerful people. Now that he's fallen, they'll either abandon him or double down. Amara, who'd been quiet since leaving the courthouse, finally spoke. Dad called. He's withdrawing the custody challenge. Said he doesn't want to be associated with this mess. Of course he did, Naomi said, hugging her daughter. Cowards always run when things get difficult. Her phone buzzed with a text from Attorney General Thornton. Grand jury convenes tomorrow. Be ready to testify. This is where we build the case that brings them all down. Naomi looked around the room at her unlikely team. A haunted whistleblower cop, a determined journalist, a retired chief who refused to let corruption win, and her brave daughter who'd stood by her through everything. Tomorrow, we tell the grand jury everything, she said. Every crime, every cover-up, every threat. Barnes thought he could grab me by the throat and get away with it. He was wrong. They were all wrong. As night fell over the city, Naomi stood at the window, looking out at the police cruiser stationed outside for protection. The officer inside gave her a respectful nod. Not all cops were corrupt, she reminded herself. Most were good people trying to do a difficult job. It was for them, as much as for the victims, that she would see this through. The preliminary hearing had been a victory, but it was just the first battle in what would be a long war. Barnes was in custody, but his network remained. Madsen was under investigation, but still free. The Union was rallying, but also fracturing. Change was coming, slow and painful, but inevitable. And Captain Naomi Carter would be there to make sure it happened, no matter what it cost. Thursday morning brought a breakthrough that would change everything. The state forensics lab had been working through the night on the precinct's backup servers, and what they found sent shockwaves through the investigation. Naomi sat in the FBI field office, watching as technical specialist Rachel Kim pulled up recovered data on multiple screens. "We found fragments from a supposedly wiped backup," Kim explained, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Someone tried to delete it, but they didn't know about the shadow copies. Look at this." The screen showed body cam footage that was supposed to have been destroyed. Barnes was clearly visible, standing over a young black man during a traffic stop, coaching Officer Tommy Garrett on escalation tactics. "Push him," Barnes's voice instructed. "Get him angry. We need him out of that building by Monday." The young man in the video kept his hands visible, repeatedly asking why he'd been stopped. Garrett followed Barnes's coaching, getting increasingly aggressive until the man finally raised his voice in frustration. That was all they needed. The arrest was swift and brutal. "There's more," Kim said, pulling up another file. 17 similar incidents over 6 months, all in buildings later sold to Madsen Development. Naomi felt sick watching the systematic destruction of innocent lives, but she also felt vindicated. This was the proof they needed. Her phone rang. It was Ortega, and he sounded excited. "Captain, Jenna Pike just brought someone in. Officer Rebecca Morris. She was part of Barnes's crew, but she wants out. She's ready to flip." An hour later, Naomi sat across from Morris in a secure interview room. The officer was young, maybe 26, with a hollow look of someone who hadn't slept in days. "I never wanted this," Morris began, her voice shaking. "I joined a force to make a difference. But Barnes, he made it clear that you were either with them or against them. And being against them meant your career was over. Tell me about the operation," Naomi said gently. Morris took a deep breath. It was like a machine. Madsen's people would identify buildings they wanted. They'd give Barnes the addresses. We'd increase patrols, make arrests, create an atmosphere of fear. Within months, residents would start leaving. Property values would drop. Madsen would swoop in with below-market offers. Who else was involved? Sergeant Patterson ran interference with the precinct. Captain Rourke in Internal Affairs buried any complaints. There's a whole network, Captain, and they're all getting paid. Morris pulled out her personal phone, showing Naomi a photo she'd taken of a whiteboard in Barnes's apartment during a party. It listed properties with dates and dollar amounts next to officer badge numbers. "I took this 6 months ago. I knew it was evidence of something, but I was too scared to do anything with it." "You're doing something now," Naomi assured her. "That's what matters." That afternoon, Claire published her most explosive article yet. Using Morris's photo and the recovered body cam footage, she laid out the entire conspiracy in devastating detail. The headline read, "The Machine: How Corrupt Cops Turn Law Enforcement into an Eviction Racket." The response was immediate. The FBI announced they were expanding their investigation. The Department of Justice announced a pattern and practice investigation into the entire police department. And, perhaps most significantly, the police union called an emergency meeting. Naomi watched the union meeting from outside, Claire beside her with her phone ready to record. Through the windows, they could see heated arguments. Union President Frank Stone was red-faced, shouting at a group of younger officers who seemed to be challenging him. "It's fracturing," Wallace observed, having joined them. "The smart ones know the ship is sinking." Indeed, within an hour, 3 officers emerged and approached Naomi directly. "Captain Carter," one said, a sergeant named David Park whom Naomi knew to be a good cop, "we want you to know that not everyone supports Barnes. Some of us have been documenting things for months, hoping someone would finally do something." He handed her a flash drive. Every suspicious arrest in the target zones. Every complaint that was buried. Every officer who took money. "We couldn't fight them alone, but maybe now." The walls were breaking. That evening, Naomi received an unexpected visitor at Wallace's house. Captain James Rourke from Internal Affairs stood at the door, looking haggard and defeated. "I need to talk," he said simply. They sat in Wallace's study, the tension thick. Rourke couldn't meet anyone's eyes as he began to speak. "I took money," he admitted. "Not much at first, just enough to look the other way on a few complaints. But it escalated. Madsen had photos of me taking the first payment. Said he'd expose me if I didn't cooperate. So you buried investigations," Naomi said, her voice cold. 23 of them, Rourke confirmed. All legitimate complaints against Barnes and his crew. "I have copies of the original reports before I altered them." Claire leaned forward. "You kept evidence?" "Insurance. I knew this day would come eventually." Rourke pulled out a tablet, showing them file after file. Every complaint, every cover-up, every payment. "It's all here. Why now?" Wallace asked. "Why come forward now?" Rourke finally looked up, and his eyes were haunted. "Because I saw the video of Barnes grabbing your throat, Captain, and I realized I'd helped create a monster. Every person he hurt after I buried those complaints, that's on me." "Yes, it is," Naomi said bluntly. "But testifying might be the first decent thing you've done in years." Meanwhile, across town, the investigation into Gregory Madsen was accelerating. The FBI had raided his home and offices simultaneously, seizing computers, documents, and several burner phones. One of those phones contained text messages that would prove crucial. "Look at this," FBI Special Agent Diana Rodriguez showed Naomi the next morning. Messages between Madsen and someone saved as badge. The metadata matches Barnes's personal phone. The messages were damning. Discussions of payment amounts, target addresses, even jokes about cleaning up the neighborhood. One message from Madsen read, "That grandmother on 3rd Street is stubborn. Need her gone by end of month." Barnes's reply, "Consider it done. Mrs. Washington from 3rd Street." Naomi remembered her interview, the fear in the elderly woman's eyes. They'd terrorized a grandmother for profit. "We have enough for RICO charges," Rodriguez said. "This is organized crime, plain and simple." Friday morning brought another breakthrough. A storage unit manager called the FBI tip line, saying he'd seen news coverage and recognized Barnes as a customer who rented multiple units under fake names. The subsequent search warrants uncovered a treasure trove of evidence. In unit after unit, they found boxes of documents Barnes had hidden. Not just records of his own crimes, but documentation on other corrupt officers. Barnes had been building leverage, collecting dirt on everyone in case he ever needed it. He was blackmailing half the department, Rodriguez said in amazement. "Look at this. Photos of Sergeant Patterson taking money from a drug dealer. Records of Captain Mitchell's gambling debts. Even dirt on Union President Stone. That's why they protected him," Naomi realized. He had something on all of them. The Union meeting that night was different from any before. Stone had been arrested that afternoon based on evidence from Barnes's storage units. The acting president, Lieutenant Maria Santos, was a reformer who'd been fighting the old guard for years. "This ends now," Santos announced to the assembled officers. "The Union will cooperate fully with all investigations. Any member found to be involved in corruption will receive no support from us. We're here to protect good cops, not criminals with badges." The room erupted in arguments, but Santos held firm. The old guard was finished, and everyone knew it. But even as victories mounted, danger remained. That night, Naomi received a call from an unknown number. "You think you've won," a disguised voice said. But Barnes was small time. "You have no idea how deep this goes." "Then tell me," Naomi challenged. "City Hall, the mayor's office, judges." Barnes was just a muscle. "You're fighting people who can destroy you with a phone call." The line went dead. Naomi looked at Wallace and Claire, who'd heard the call on speaker. "They're scared. Good. Or desperate," Wallace warned. "And desperate people do desperate things." Saturday morning, Naomi sat in Attorney General Thornton's office with FBI Special Agent Rodriguez, planning their final move. They had Barnes and many of his crew, but the bigger fish, Madsen and his political connections, remained free. "We need someone on the inside to wear a wire," Rodriguez said. "Someone they still trust." "I have an idea," Naomi said. "Jenna Pike. Barnes still thinks she's loyal. She visited him in jail yesterday, playing the part of the concerned partner. Would she do it? For immunity and witness protection? Yes. The plan was dangerous but necessary. Pike would arrange a meeting with Barnes's remaining free associates, claiming she had information that could help his case. She'd get them talking about the broader conspiracy, particularly Madsen's connections to city officials. That afternoon, Pike sat in an FBI van while technicians fitted her with a state-of-the-art recording device, invisible under her clothing. Remember, Naomi coached her, you need them to talk about Madsen about City Hall. Barnes is done, but we need the rest. I know what to do, Pike said, though her hands shook slightly. The meeting was set for a bar known to be a cop hangout, supposedly neutral ground. Pike walked in to find Sergeant Patterson, Officer Jenkins, and surprisingly, a man in an expensive suit whom Naomi recognized from surveillance photos as Gregory Madsen's lawyer, Arthur Brennan. Jenna, Patterson greeted her suspiciously. Heard you've been talking to the feds. Had to, Pike replied smoothly. They had me dead to rights on that traffic stop video. But I've been playing them, feeding them just enough to stay out of jail while learning what they really have. And, Brennan asked, they're focused on Barnes. They think he was the ringleader. They don't know about the real operation. Patterson relaxed slightly. Barnes always was too flashy, drawing attention with his cowboy nonsense. Should have stuck to the plan, Jenkins agreed. Madsen had it all figured out. Quiet pressure, gradual escalation. But Barnes had to go and grab a captain by the throat. Speaking of Madsen, Pike prompted, is he protected? Brennan smiled coldly. Mr. Madsen has friends in high places. The mayor owes him for his campaign contributions. 3 city council members are in his pocket. Even if the FBI gets close, calls will be made. Must be nice, Pike said, fishing for more. Having that kind of insurance. It's not insurance, it's investment, Brennan corrected. Madsen owns half the city council. Judge Franklin, too. You think Barnes's case will really go to trial? The judge will find a reason to dismiss. Constitutional violations, procedural errors, something. Patterson laughed. Remember when Judge Franklin dismissed that assault case against Barnes last year? Kid had video evidence and everything. Franklin ruled it inadmissible because the officer hadn't been properly Mirandized or some nonsense. That's the system, Jenkins said. We protect Madsen's investments. Madsen protects us. Been working for years. In the FBI van, Naomi and Rodriguez exchanged glances. This was exactly what they needed. Pike pushed further. What about Carter? She's not backing down. Carter's done, Brennan said confidently. If she keeps pushing, unfortunate things might happen. Single mother, teenage daughter, lots of vulnerabilities. You're not seriously talking about, Pike started. I'm not talking about anything, Brennan cut her off. I'm just observing that Captain Carter should be very careful. Accidents happen. Houses burn down. Cars have brake failures. That was enough. Rodriguez gave the signal, and FBI agents stormed the bar. Patterson reached for his weapon, but thought better of it when he saw the tactical team. Jenkins tried to run, but was quickly tackled. Brennan stood perfectly still, his face pale as he realized Pike had been wearing a wire. Arthur Brennan, Michael Patterson, Stephen Jenkins, Rodriguez announced, "You're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and threatening a federal witness." As they were led away in handcuffs, Patterson glared at Pike. "You're dead. You know that, right? Is that another threat we should add to the charges?" Rodriguez asked coolly. Sunday brought a coordinated operation that would go down in the city's history. At exactly 6 a.m., FBI and state police executed simultaneous raids across the city. Madsen was arrested at his mansion, still in his pajamas. 3 city council members were taken into custody. Judge Franklin was arrested on his way to Sunday service. Naomi watched from the FBI command center as the operation unfolded on multiple screens. Each arrest was clean, professional, and by the book. They weren't giving anyone grounds for dismissal on technicalities. But the biggest surprise came when Mayor Robert Harrison called a press conference that afternoon. Standing at the podium, looking older than his 60 years, he made a stunning announcement. "I am resigning effective immediately," he said. I have been informed that I am under investigation for accepting bribes from Madsen Development. While I maintain my innocence, I believe the city needs leadership that isn't under this cloud. Claire, standing next to Naomi, was already typing. He's trying to get ahead of it. Resignation in exchange for reduced charges, probably. Let him resign, Naomi said, as long as he testifies. Monday morning, Barnes was brought from jail to a meeting room where Naomi waited with Attorney General Thornton. Your friends gave you up, Thornton told him bluntly. We have recordings of them discussing how you were the weak link, too aggressive, too visible. They're all claiming you were the ringleader. Barnes's face went red, then white. Those bastards. I did everything they asked. Then tell us about it, Naomi said. Full cooperation, and maybe you don't spend the rest of your life in prison. For a moment, Barnes maintained his defiance. Then, like a dam breaking, he began to talk. He detailed every payoff, every forced eviction, every civil rights violation. He named names, provided dates, and even told them where to find additional evidence. Madsen has recordings, he said. He recorded every meeting, every payoff. Insurance, he called it. Hidden in a safety deposit box at First National, Box 447. The warrant for the safety deposit box was expedited, and by that afternoon, they had the recordings. Hours of video showing Madsen meeting with city officials, handing over cash-filled envelopes, discussing which neighborhoods to target next. One recording was particularly damning. Madsen sat with Judge Franklin, sliding a thick envelope across the table. Just need you to handle any cases that come up regarding my properties, Madsen said on the recording. Consider it done, Franklin replied, pocketing the money. Justice is blind, after all. By Monday evening, the full scope of the conspiracy was clear. 37 people had been arrested, including police officers, city officials, judges, and Madsen's entire inner circle. The U.S. Attorney announced federal charges under the RICO Act, treating the entire operation as organized crime. Tuesday morning's emergency city council meeting was packed. With 3 members arrested and the mayor resigned, the remaining council members voted unanimously to request federal oversight of the police department. They also voted to establish an independent civilian review board with real power to investigate police misconduct. Naomi testified before the council, laying out her recommendations for reform. We need mandatory body cameras with strict penalties for tampering. We need an early warning system for officers with multiple complaints. We need transparency in how complaints are investigated. And we need to break the culture of silence that allowed this to happen. Every recommendation was adopted. That afternoon, Naomi stood in the parking lot where it had all started. The grocery store was busy with normal shoppers, none of them aware of the significance of this spot. Claire stood beside her, documenting the moment. How does it feel? Claire asked. Like the beginning, Naomi replied. Barnes is going to prison, probably for 20 years. Madsen's looking at life. The corrupt officials are falling like dominoes. But the real work, rebuilding trust, changing culture, ensuring this never happens again, that's just starting. Her phone rang. It was Wallace. State Attorney General wants to see you, he said. Something about a promotion. An hour later, Naomi sat across from Attorney General Thornton, who smiled for the first time since this all began. Captain Carter, your actions have exposed and dismantled one of the largest corruption rings in state history. The governor and I would like to offer you a position. Deputy Chief of the new Police Integrity Unit. You'd oversee implementation of all reforms and have direct authority to investigate corruption statewide. I need to think about it, Naomi said. Of course. But Naomi, you've proven that one person can make a difference. Imagine what you could do with real authority. That evening, Naomi sat with Amara at home. Their real home, no longer needing to hide at Wallace's. The windows had been repaired, the garage repainted. It looked normal, but they both knew nothing would ever be quite the same. You're going to take the job, aren't you? Amara asked. Would you be okay with that? It means more danger, more attention. Amara considered this. Mom, I watched you stand up to corruption when everyone said to back down. I watched you risk everything for justice. If you don't take this job, who will? Who else will fight for the next person grabbed by the throat in a parking lot? Wednesday, the grand jury returned indictments on all major conspirators. Barnes was charged with 23 counts including assault, civil rights violations, conspiracy, and racketeering. Madsen faced 47 counts. Judge Franklin, once thought untouchable, faced federal corruption charges that would likely result in decades in prison. The courtroom was packed for Barnes's formal indictment. He stood in his orange jumpsuit, no longer the cocky officer who'd grabbed Naomi's throat just 11 days ago. When asked how he pleaded, his voice was barely audible. Guilty. As part of his plea deal, Barnes agreed to testify against everyone else. His testimony would be crucial in ensuring convictions up the chain of command. Outside the courthouse, Naomi faced the media one more time. "This case was never just about what happened to me in that parking lot," she said. "It was about a system that enabled and protected corruption. Today, we've shown that no one is above the law. Not police officers, not developers, not judges, not mayors. Justice may be slow, but it is inevitable when good people refuse to back down." A reporter asked, "What's next for you, Captain?" "Deputy Chief," Naomi corrected. "I've accepted the position with the Police Integrity Unit. The work isn't done. It's just beginning." As she walked away from the cameras, Wallace, Claire, Ortega, Pike, and Amara were waiting for her. Her unlikely team, forged in crisis, now committed to lasting reform. "So, Deputy Chief," Wallace said with a grin, "ready to clean up the rest of the state?" "One corrupt cop at a time," Naomi replied. That night, Naomi received a package at her home. Inside was a new badge, Deputy Chief, Police Integrity Unit, and a note from Attorney General Thornton, "For someone who refused to let go, even when they had you by the throat." Naomi held the badge, thinking about that night in the parking lot. Barnes had grabbed her throat, thinking she was just another black woman he could intimidate. He'd had no idea he was grabbing hold of his own destruction. The trap had been set not by Naomi, but by Barnes himself, the moment he chose to abuse his power. The takedown hadn't just been of one corrupt cop, but of an entire network that thought itself untouchable. Justice had won. Not perfectly, not completely, but thoroughly enough to matter. And tomorrow, Deputy Chief Naomi Carter would begin the work of making sure it stayed that way. 6 months had passed since that night in the parking lot, and now the main event had arrived. The federal courthouse downtown had been transformed into a fortress of security for what media outlets were calling the trial of the century for the city. Naomi walked through the metal detectors in her crisp deputy chief uniform, her new badge catching the morning light. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. The trial had been consolidated. Barnes, Madsen, Judge Franklin, and 14 other defendants would face justice together under RICO statutes. The prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Crawford, had spent months preparing what they promised would be an airtight case. Jury selection had taken 2 weeks, with the defense trying desperately to find jurors who hadn't heard about the case. They'd settled on a diverse panel of 12 citizens and 4 alternates, each vetted extensively for bias. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Patricia Hawthorne presiding. Judge Hawthorne, brought in from another district to avoid any appearance of local bias, took her seat. She was known for running a tight courtroom and having zero tolerance for theatrics. "We begin with opening statements," she announced. "Ms. Crawford." The prosecutor stood, commanding the room's attention immediately. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about corruption so deep, so pervasive, that it infected every level of our city's power structure. The defendants didn't just break the law, they weaponized it. They turned the police force into a private army for profit, terrorizing innocent citizens to drive them from their homes." Crawford clicked a remote, and a photo appeared on the screen. Naomi in the parking lot, Barnes's hand around her throat. "This image," Crawford continued, "captured the moment their scheme began to unravel. Officer Kyle Barnes thought he was grabbing just another black woman he could intimidate. Instead, he grabbed hold of his own destruction, because Captain Naomi Carter refused to be another silent victim. The defense team, led by Richard Stockton, tried to paint a different picture in their opening. "This is a case of overzealous prosecution," Stockton argued. Officer Barnes made a mistake in a tense situation. That mistake has been twisted into a vast conspiracy that simply doesn't exist. My client is being railroaded by a system eager to find scapegoats for broader societal problems. But Stockton's words rang hollow as Crawford began presenting evidence. The 4K bystander footage played first, showing Barnes's assault in crystal clear detail. Several jurors visibly winced when Barnes's hand closed around Naomi's throat. "I was scared," testified Maria Santos, the teenager with purple hair who'd recorded the incident. "He looked like he wanted to kill her. If she hadn't shown that badge." Next came the financial evidence. Crawford methodically walked the jury through the money trail, deposits, withdrawals, property records. She showed how property values mysteriously dropped in areas where Barnes's crew operated, only to be scooped up by Madsen Development at bargain prices. Over 2 years, Crawford explained, this conspiracy generated over $40 million in illegal profits. The defendants didn't just steal money. They stole homes, communities, entire neighborhoods. On day 3 of the trial, Luis Ortega took the stand. He looked healthier than he had 6 months ago. The stress lines on his face softened now that his family was safe. "Tell us about the cleaners," Crawford prompted. Ortega's testimony was devastating. He detailed the entire operation, the targeting of specific buildings, the harassment campaigns, the planted evidence. He produced documentation he'd secretly compiled, including recordings of Barnes instructing officers on how to escalate situations. "Did you participate in these activities?" Crawford asked. "Yes," Ortega admitted. "To my eternal shame. I was scared for my job, for my family. But that's no excuse. I should have spoken up sooner." Stockton tried to discredit Ortega on cross-examination. "Isn't it true you're testifying in exchange for immunity?" "Yes," Ortega replied steadily. "But everything I'm saying is documented. I have recordings, photos, dates, times. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm showing you proof." Jenna Pike's testimony was equally damaging. She played the recording from the bar where Patterson, Jenkins, and Madsen's lawyer had discussed their conspiracy. "The judge will find a reason to dismiss," Brennan's voice echoed through the courtroom. "Constitutional violations, procedural errors, something." Judge Franklin, sitting among the defendants, had gone pale as his own corruption was laid bare. But the most dramatic moment came when Barnes himself took the stand. As part of his plea deal, he had agreed to testify against his co-conspirators. The man who'd once swaggered through neighborhoods like he owned them now looked small in his orange jumpsuit. "Mr. Barnes," Crawford began, "tell us about your relationship with Gregory Madsen." Barnes's testimony was a masterclass in self-preservation. He detailed every meeting, every payment, every order from Madsen. He produced dates, times, and amounts with mechanical precision. "Madsen called us his cleaning crew," Barnes said. "He'd identify properties he wanted, and we'd make life hell for the residents until they sold or abandoned them." "Was Captain Carter targeted?" Crawford asked. "No," Barnes admitted. "That was my mistake. I saw a black woman in a nice car and assumed. I just assumed. If I'd known she was a captain." "You would have what?" Crawford pressed. "Been more respectful? Not assaulted her." Barnes was quiet for a moment. "I would have walked away." "So you only assault civilians, not fellow officers?" "I didn't mean." "What did you mean, Mr. Barnes?" The cross-examination by Madsen's attorney was brutal but ineffective. Barnes had been thoroughly prepared by the prosecution. Every attempt to shake his testimony failed. The evidence phase continued for 2 weeks. Mrs. Dolores Washington testified about the harassment she'd endured. Former residents described being arrested on fabricated charges. City officials who'd taken bribes were paraded through, each adding another layer to the conspiracy. One of the most powerful moments came when Captain Rourke testified. Now stripped of his badge and facing his own prison term, he detailed how he'd buried 23 legitimate complaints against Barnes and his crew. "I betrayed my oath," Rourke said, his voice breaking. "I betrayed every citizen who came to me for help. I can't undo that, but I can tell the truth now." The defense's case was weak by comparison. They tried to argue that Barnes was a rogue officer, that Madsen was a legitimate businessman, that the payments were consulting fees. but the evidence was overwhelming. Madsen himself took the stand, trying to portray himself as a victim of over-aggressive policing. But Crawford destroyed him on cross-examination, playing his own recordings back to him. "That's your voice saying the grandmother on 3rd Street needs to be gone by month's end, isn't it?" Crawford asked. "I meant through legal means." And when Barnes replied, "Consider it done." What legal means was he referring to? Madsen had no answer. Judge Franklin's attorney tried to argue entrapment, claiming his client had been coerced into taking bribes. But the video evidence showed Franklin eagerly accepting money, even joking about how justice is blind. After 3 weeks of testimony, closing arguments began. Crawford stood before the jury one final time. "You've seen the evidence," she said. "You've heard the testimony. This wasn't one bad cop having a bad day. This was organized crime wearing badges and suits. They terrorized communities, destroyed lives, and perverted justice itself for profit. Your verdict won't just punish them. It will tell every corrupt official that no one is above the law." Stockton's closing was desperate, asking the jury to consider Barnes's years of service, Madsen's charitable contributions, Franklin's judicial record. But it felt hollow after weeks of damning evidence. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Naomi waited in her office, trying to focus on her new duties but constantly checking her phone for updates. Amara was at school, texting every hour for news. Wallace sat with her, providing silent support. Finally, the call came. Verdicts had been reached. The courtroom was silent as the forewoman stood. On the count of conspiracy to violate civil rights, we find the defendant, Kyle Barnes, guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom. Barnes dropped his head into his hands. On the count of racketeering, guilty. On the count of assault under color of law, guilty. One by one, the verdicts came down. Barnes was convicted on all 23 counts. Madsen was found guilty on all 47 counts. Judge Franklin was convicted on all federal corruption charges. Of the 17 defendants, 15 were convicted on all counts. 2 received partial convictions. The courtroom erupted. Some of Barnes's remaining supporters shouted about injustice, but they were drowned out by applause from the victims and their families. Mrs. Washington wept openly, finally seeing justice for her community. Judge Hawthorne gavelled for order. "We'll reconvene for sentencing in 30 days. Outside the courthouse, Naomi faced a sea of microphones. "Justice has been served," she said simply. "But our work isn't done. This verdict is just the beginning of rebuilding trust between police and communities." The sentencing hearing a month later was almost anticlimactic. Barnes received 25 years in federal prison. Madsen got life without parole. Judge Franklin received 30 years. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. Barnes spoke briefly before sentencing. "I'm sorry," he said, not looking at Naomi. "I became something I never intended to be." Madsen remained defiant to the end, claiming he was a legitimate businessman persecuted for his success. Judge Hawthorne was unmoved. "Mr. Madsen," she said, "you corrupted an entire city's power structure for profit. You turned police officers into your personal militia. The damage you've done to community trust will take generations to repair. Life without parole is the only appropriate sentence." With the trials concluded, the real work of reform began. Naomi threw herself into her role as deputy chief of the Police Integrity Unit. The changes came fast and decisive. Every police officer in the state now wore body cameras that uploaded to cloud storage in real time, making tampering impossible. An early warning system flagged officers with multiple complaints for review. A civilian oversight board with real investigative power was established in every major city. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. The blue wall of silence that had protected corrupt cops for generations began to crack. Officers started reporting misconduct, knowing that staying silent could end their careers just as surely as corruption itself. 6 months after the verdict, Naomi stood before a graduating class at the police academy. "You're entering a different police force than the one I joined 20 years ago," she told them. "We've learned painful lessons about what happens when we forget that we serve the people. not ourselves. Your badge is not a license to intimidate. It's a promise to protect. The community oversight clinic that Naomi had established with her civil suit settlement was thriving. Located in the heart of Riverside Heights, it provided free legal services to victims of police misconduct and trained community members on their rights. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was emotional. Mrs. Washington was there, having decided to stay in her home now that the neighborhood was safe again. Former victims who'd been too scared to speak up before now had a place to turn. This clinic, Naomi said at the ceremony, represents what justice looks like when it keeps going. It's not enough to punish the guilty. We have to support the innocent, rebuild what was broken, and ensure it never happens again. Claire Dawson's book about the case, Daylight Wins, The Fall of the Blue Wall, became a bestseller. She donated half the proceeds to the clinic. Her continued reporting had exposed similar corruption rings in 3 other cities, leading to federal interventions there as well. Luis Ortega had become head of the department's new early intervention unit, using his insider knowledge to identify potentially corrupt officers before they could cause harm. His family had returned from witness protection, and his children were proud of their father for doing the right thing, even when it was dangerous. Jenna Pike had relocated to another state, starting fresh with a position training officers in ethical decision-making. She carried the weight of her past mistakes, but was determined to prevent others from making the same choices. Even Captain Rourke, serving his 5-year sentence, was contributing. From prison, he wrote a manual on recognizing and combating corruption within internal affairs departments. It became required reading at police academies nationwide. The city itself was transforming. The neighborhoods that had been targeted for forced gentrification were now protected by new laws preventing predatory development. Property values were rising naturally as crime decreased and trust in police grew. A year after the verdict, Naomi returned once more to that parking lot where it all began. This time, she wasn't alone. Amara stood beside her, now 18 and headed to college to study criminal justice, inspired by her mother's fight. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't shown your badge that night? Amara asked. Every day, Naomi admitted. But then I think about all the people who couldn't show a badge, who didn't have my platform, who suffered in silence. That's why we keep fighting. The grocery store had put up a small plaque near the entrance. On this site, justice began with one person refusing to accept injustice. It had become something of a landmark, with people stopping to take pictures and remember that change is possible. Wallace, now serving as an advisor to the Police Integrity Unit, often brought new recruits to the spot. This is where Deputy Chief Carter proved that nobody is above the law, he'd tell them. Not street cops, not captains, not judges, not developers. The law applies equally, or it doesn't apply at all. The police union had been completely restructured. Lieutenant Maria Santos, now union president, had implemented new bylaws requiring immediate cooperation with corruption investigations. The union still protected officers' rights, but it no longer sheltered criminals. We learned the hard way, Santos said at a national conference, that protecting bad cops doesn't protect good cops. It destroys them. Barnes, serving his sentence in federal prison, had reportedly found religion and was teaching literacy to other inmates. His letters requesting forgiveness from his victims went unanswered, but Naomi hoped he was genuinely trying to change. Madsen's assets had been seized and liquidated, with the proceeds going to a fund for his victims. Every family that had been forced from their homes received compensation. It couldn't undo the trauma, but it was a start. Judge Franklin had been disbarred, and his past cases were under review. Several convictions he'd overseen were overturned when evidence of bias was found. The judicial system was slowly cleaning house, removing other corrupt judges who'd been exposed by the investigation. 3 years after that night in the parking lot, Naomi was promoted to chief of police for the entire state, the first black woman to hold the position. At her swearing-in ceremony, she stood before a crowd that included Mrs. Washington, Claire Ortega, Pike via video link, and dozens of others who'd been part of the journey. 3 years ago, Naomi began her speech. An officer grabbed me by the throat in a parking lot. He thought he was grabbing just another black woman he could intimidate. Instead, he grabbed hold of something much bigger: a community's demand for justice, a city's hunger for change, a nation's recognition that reform is not just possible but necessary. She paused, looking at Amara in the front row, now a college junior interning with the Department of Justice. That officer is in prison now, along with those who enabled him. But this isn't about vengeance. It's about transformation. Every corrupt official we remove, every unjust practice we reform, every community we heal, that's what justice looks like when it keeps going. The applause was thunderous, but Naomi wasn't finished. We've made enormous progress, but our work isn't done. There are still communities that don't trust police, and with good reason. There are still officers who think the badge makes them above the law. There are still systems that prioritize power over justice. But we've proven that change is possible when good people refuse to back down. After the ceremony, Naomi stood in her new office, looking out over the city. The parking lot where it all began was visible in the distance. She thought about that night, the fear, the anger, the moment she decided to show her badge. Her phone rang. It was a report of potential police corruption in another district. "I'll handle it personally," she told her assistant. As she prepared to leave, Amara texted her, "Proud of you, Mom. Keep fighting." Naomi smiled, grabbed her keys, and headed out. The work continued. Justice, she had learned, wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And she intended to keep walking that path, no matter how long it took or how hard it became. In the parking lot where it had all begun, a young black woman was loading groceries into her car. A police officer approached, and she tensed. But the officer simply helped her with a heavy bag that was about to fall, tipped his hat, and continued his patrol. Small changes, Naomi thought, watching from her car, but change nonetheless. The system that had protected Barnes was dismantled. The corruption that had infected the city was exposed and excised. The communities that had been terrorized were healing. And somewhere in federal prison, Kyle Barnes sat in his cell, perhaps finally understanding that when he grabbed Captain Naomi Carter by the throat that night, he hadn't just assaulted one woman. He had triggered the downfall of an entire corrupt system. Justice had won. Not perfectly, not completely, but thoroughly enough to matter. And under Chief Naomi Carter's leadership, it would keep winning one case at a time, one reform at a time, one community at a time. The parking lot that had been a site of violence was now a symbol of transformation. And the woman who'd been grabbed by the throat had become the voice of change for an entire state. This is what justice looks like when it keeps going. When you witness injustice, do you pull out your phone or do you look away? Like and subscribe for more stories about ordinary moments that change everything.